Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. I do hope you're doing incredibly well. I'm doing fabulous, thank you very much, and lots of hugs to all of you, and I hope that you're going to go and get yourself something lovely and warm to drink, because we're on part 4 of our story and it gets more and more intriguing by the second. So before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's continue with part 4 of our story tonight. "Thank you very much for the lift, Mr. Armstrong," said Marcus, going to the trunk to retrieve his suitcase, which felt really heavy. He waved a hand at Mr. Armstrong, thanking him for telling him the whole story that he'd heard about Clayton Manor, although it had naturally made Marcus feel distinctly uneasy. He told himself that had all happened a very long time ago. If the truth be told, it was probably unlikely that the creature that Philip O'Rourke had encountered 20 years prior, that had told him to leave, was even around anymore. And even if it was, Marcus reminded himself that the hairy humanoid had been benevolent by nature, until of course it had been deliberately provoked by the likes of Philip O'Rourke. Marcus had never encountered the creature, so why would it hold a grudge towards him, as Marcus had done it no harm? He needed to tell himself this, otherwise becoming groundsman for Clayton Manor might become clouded by a dark shadow of trepidation that he might wear upon his shoulders like an overcoat. Edward Armstrong waved at Marcus. Then his car glided away down the long stretch of pitted road, while Marcus, feeling somewhat bewildered, found himself staring at the grey manor house. In truth, nothing had prepared him for what he was seeing. It was true. The downcast, neglected place looked both abandoned and forsaken, as if the old mansion itself had been targeted aggressively by the natural world, and was rapidly descending into a spiral of unchecked decay, as burgeoning ivy, resolute in its determination to cause as much chaotic harm as possible, had run a rampant riot all over the manor house, with gnarled, contorted and twisted fingers intent on strangling everything in its wake, with a nebulous suffocation. Marcus was most sure that this frenzied vine was probably growing right through the interior ceilings, and had probably entangled itself around some of the 3-story mansion's magnificent crystal chandeliers. The huge, once palatial mansion squatted over a large surface area, which suggested it contained a great deal of sizable airy rooms, probably with high ornate ceilings. In its day, Marcus was absolutely certain that this once imposing grand mansion would have been breathtakingly stunning, and certainly with a fresh coat of white paint on its walls and a big clean-up project, the manor house could actually still become something appreciatively grand, if a monumentally strenuous effort were invested in such a daunting, intimidating fix-up project, which would not be for the faint of heart to undertake. The sizable house almost certainly had very good bones, and was structurally sound. It was well built, but right now the manor house was a sight for very sore eyes, with thick chunks of rust eroding the structure. The anemic, sickly-coloured jejune manor house stared back at Marcus through soulless dark eyes, as if melancholic and sad, almost as if the house knew its glory days were long since departed, and now, like an old hag with frail bones and crumbling knees, she had become all but like a dying flower, almost as if all hope seemed to have been lost. The feeling was so incredibly palpable to Marcus. It was almost as if the house itself could sense the hopelessness of its current plight, and was well resigned to its obvious destitution, like a once wealthy woman who had been disrobed of all her finery and honour, and now had resorted to wearing all but sackcloth and ashes. It was plain to see that no one had manicured the extensive grounds on the property in over 20 years. The entire front yard was a rough, unsightly twist and jumbled tangle of weeds, thorny briars and rambling thickets, with no boundary or restraint, and had so obviously rudely overtaken the entire property. All this undergrowth had done its best to obscure the mansion, with little success. The rampant undergrowth had taken over everything. Some weeds had become as tall as trees themselves, with spiky, grotesque appendages and ugly thorns. Marcus noted on what was left of the cracked red brick driveway were a couple of carcasses that looked to be deserted cars, completely covered in rust. They too were surrounded by yet more burgeoning vines that grew into the vehicle's windows, so that Marcus wouldn't even be privy in being able to work out what the cars had initially been. But doubtlessly for their time, they would have been significantly expensive. It was poignantly clear from Marcus's scant observation that the O'Rourke family rarely had up and left and never returned to their property. So the rather remarkable story Edward Armstrong had told him seemed to carry a whole lot more weight. It was more than a little dispiriting to witness the degradation of such a potentially grandiose property that had lost its dignity, self-respect and pride, rather like a queen that had been cruelly dethroned from her position of prominence and glory. At the back of the property in the furthest distance, Marcus observed some very tall, lofty, ancient-looking trees that were magnificent in both stature and repose. They were like nature's most masterful skyscrapers that ripped very unabashedly into the denim blue sky in a blaze of viridescent green leaves that shone under the morning sun like shimmering emerald jewels. These trees were not prepared to descend into the senseless oblivion the mansion so obviously had done, and were more determined than ever to live out their best years yet. Marcus was most sure that those trees must represent the outside layer of the woodgrove, where Philip O'Rourke had his cryptic, rather unorthodox encounter. But he didn't want to think about any of that now. He could see the job he was about to undertake as groundsman for the estate was not an easy one by any manner of means, but at least it paid well, and at the end of the day, money always talks, and Marcus could not afford to be choosy. Besides, he was here now, and he didn't have the luxury of changing his mind about the job. It was obvious that the grounds had not been attended to in many years, so an intimidating, thankless task lay ahead of him, like an uncharted map yet to be explored. At least, he reasoned to himself, if all went well, he'd have a roof over his head and money in his pocket. Marcus opened the large black wrought-iron gate that was rusted in many parts and squeaked furiously when he opened it. It had not been oiled in many years, that was very clear. Thank God it wasn't locked, he thought. Marcus made his way steadily down the overgrown path, across what was left of the red brick driveway, to what at one time had been a stately front door, but the black paint on the door was peeling away like the skin of a reptile. Marcus looked around and about himself nervously for any signs of human life, but everything felt forebodingly airy. Marcus felt something scratching the inside of his heavy suitcase, and then he heard a meow. What the hell? He thought. Something was inside his suitcase. He bent down to open the suitcase that snapped open very suddenly, and rising out among a few layers of his clothing was Talister the cat, who jumped out of the suitcase and took in his new surroundings with large yellow eyes and a kind of "Where am I?" look. Marcus shook his head and laughed. I should have guessed you'd climbed into my suitcase, Talister, given it was so curiously heavy to carry. You always did enjoy lying among my clothes. Well, I've got news for you, Talister. You're not going back to St. James any time soon. You're stuck here with me. But I'll be glad of your company, let me tell you. I've already missed you. But I will let your owner know about your whereabouts. But I don't think she'll be coming for you any time soon. She never was desperately interested in cats. Marcus had secretly almost cried with joy to see Talister again. Talister stretched out her paws lackadaisically, as if she had woken from a very pleasant, satisfactory sleep. She promptly trotted by Marcus's side, dangling her furry body between his legs, and letting out a very satisfied, contented purr. Moments later Marcus set about industriously exploring the estate grounds, with a curious intrigue. He needed to get a full sense of the place. There was no sign of Zack O'Rourke anywhere to be seen. The large house was locked up, but Marcus found a manila envelope on the dingy doormat with its faded welcome sign barely even visible. The envelope was addressed to him. He opened it curiously, and a week's wages spilled into his hands, along with a familiar-looking pink stock card. The note on the card read, "Welcome to Clayton Manor, Mr. Devereux. You will find all the tools you need to attend to the estate.
will be found in the yard shed, which is very sizable. I have checked they will suit your requirements. Your living quarters are in the cottage on the grounds that is being cleaned out and prepared especially for you. There are a few supplies available for you in the pantry. I hope you will be happy here managing the grounds on my behalf. Your work is greatly appreciated and will never be taken for granted. I will leave your wages at the front door in a manila envelope every Tuesday morning, provided I am fully satisfied with the quality of your work. There is a bicycle available for your use in the yard shed. The nearest town is a 10-minute cycle ride away. But I have taken it upon myself to send you essential supplies every week to the house, which will be delivered by Mr. Thinball, the grocer. These benefits are all part of your wage package. Welcome to Clayton Manor, Mr. Devereux."
Marcus was very surprised to just receive a note from Zack O'Rourke and not to meet the man himself in person. But that didn't matter. Things looked promising. He had already received an attractive wage package before he'd even started working, and that was a great start. Marcus settled down on the estate at Clayton Manor very comfortably. The cottage on the grounds was in remarkably good condition and had recently been renovated. Someone had gone to great lengths to make the cottage sumptuously cosy and warmly welcoming for him. The place smelt of fresh paint, and Marcus could barely believe the good fortune that the entire cottage had been fitted with high-quality, expensive all-wool carpets. The furniture was stylishly comfortable and included a fabulous queen-size bed, the likes of such that Marcus had never slept in before. By the looks of things, Marcus sensed he had really gone up in the world. His living conditions had improved exponentially. Even though the grounds at Clayton Manor were pitiful to say the very least, in due course that would all change. Marcus still had not physically met Zack O'Rourke, even though many weeks had gone by. The man seemed to be as elusive as the Scarlet Pimpernel. But he obviously diligently popped by every single week on a Tuesday as promised to inspect the quality of Marcus's work. He would also get an appraisal of his work, usually written on the pink stock card, in the familiar flowing handwriting. The good news, it would seem, was that Zack O'Rourke was pleased with his work, and every week Marcus would find his pay in an envelope, so he was piling up for himself a decent amount of cash that he looked forward to taking back to Tennessee to give to his mother, who would more than likely be thrilled to receive such money, and also to learn of Marcus's obvious success. Every week Marcus would count his money and thank his lucky stars that he had auspiciously stumbled across an advertisement in the post office that had changed his life for the better, as now he was making such good money, and his life was a far cry from the dingy apartment block he had inhabited at St. James, in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. On arrival at the cottage, Marcus had been welcomed to a pantry well stocked with the most delicious food, doubtlessly all organised by Zack O'Rourke, who had planned everything so seamlessly for him. And against all the odds, Zack O'Rourke had even left a supply of cat food for Talister in the weeks that followed, so no doubt Zack O'Rourke himself must have had a run-in with the cat. Every week the grocer, Mr. Pinball, would arrive in his green van, with a white fancy signage on the side, which read Pinball's Exclusive Grocers. The cheery man would deliver Marcus several large, posh-looking brown bags filled with everything that Marcus would need for the entire week. Marcus didn't even have to leave the property to go shopping in town, although sometimes he did for the hell of it. The food he received was not only included in his job, but was of an extremely high quality, and not the kind of food he had ever been able to afford in the past. Talister had taken to following Marcus around dutifully everywhere he went, rather like a devoted dog. The cat seemed to settle down very well at the manor, and had forgotten all about the grubby apartment block at St. James, where she had dutifully scared off any stray cats that had the audacity of closing in on her territory. Now she had a new territory to protect, but luckily no stray cats had made their presence known as yet. Marcus was sure Talister appreciated the delights of the countryside and everything it had to offer. She seemed to adapt quickly to her whole new life, where nature ruled supreme instead of the concrete jungle of her former residence at St. James. Talister's former owner had been notified by Marcus a long time ago, but had said quite simply that Marcus was welcome to keep the cat. Out here at the manor it was a whole new world for Talister. No doubt she thought she'd died and gone to heaven,
when she'd inadvertently popped out of a suitcase and found herself in a dreamy place. It might have at first been wild and extremely overgrown, but to Talister, the cat found the place a brand new adventure, with so many exciting nooks and crannies to explore. Marcus was exceedingly glad that Talister had chosen to sleep in his suitcase that day, and had accidentally been ferried to his new job, rather like secret cargo being whisked surreptitiously away, as her companionship was invaluable to Marcus, as it meant he never got lonely. Against all the odds, Talister had lost weight from her exertion in chasing after butterflies and birds. Too bad that at St. James she had possessed zero interest in making inroads into the rat population there. But then again, maybe that was a good thing, as her owner would have wanted to keep her then. To all intents and purposes, Marcus had done an exemplary job in cleaning up the grounds single-handedly at Clayton Manor. His rough, wary, weather-worn hands were more callous than ever. Before long, other suppliers, like workmen, arrived on the scene. Scaffolding was erected around the manor house. Workmen came and went, and began to steadily fix up the place, and the old bedraggled manor house slowly and surely came back to life, like a little spark that finally erupts into an awe-inspiring firework that sets the sky ablaze with its resplendence. One day, as Marcus was sweeping up the dead leaves along the newly laid red brick driveway, he observed a black Buick Roadmaster driving cautiously down the driveway. It parked only a few feet away from the gleaming front door that now boasted a sleek coat of black shiny paint, along with a gold door knocker. Climbing out of the car was a very suave, debonair-looking gentleman with a distinguished moustache, wearing a soft-tailored suit, striped blue and white shirt with gold cufflinks, and a pair of shining black Oxfords on his feet. He trotted over to the passenger side door and opened it courteously, with the manner of a refined gentleman. A glamorous woman, who looked like a movie star, climbed out of the car. She was wearing a long, flowing, red A-line dress with an hourglass red bodice, along with a navy blue shawl over her narrow shoulders. She also wore a designer scarf over her hair, in a navy red and blue floral design, along with a pair of fashionable designer dark glasses that took up most of her petite face. Marcus looked up from the leaves he'd been sweeping, to observe the couple more closely. They didn't appear to have noticed him. Hand in hand, they stood back to stare at Clayton Manor, to get the full measure of it all, and even Marcus had to admit in that moment that the mansion looked splendid, palatial, majestically illustrious, distinguished and dignified, as it lightly had done going all the way back to the 1800s. The young woman threw her arms around the very refined-looking gentleman. She stood before the renovated manor house, and appeared to be caught up in a bubble of awe-inspiring intrigue. Finally she removed her dark glasses from her eyes, that shone like twinkling stars, and it looked to Marcus by the woman's reaction to Clayton Manor as if she'd never observed a more magnificent home in all her life. It would seem with the diaphanous light of the new morning, casting its ethereal gossamery shadows over the newly painted white walls, the manor house had never looked more stately or imposing. Even Marcus had to admit that the transformations to Clayton Manor had been absolutely tremendous. The manor house now boasted perfect gardens that had successfully been procured with the help of landscapers that had been recruited by Zack O'Rourke. They had trimmed hedges, planted roses, magnanimously thrown pretty injections of colour all over the flower gardens, so everything looked idyllic and wonderful. So many people had come and gone, all injecting their professional brilliant flair into restoring this place to its former glory. So like a phoenix rising from the ashes, the once melancholic manor house had come back to life all over again, like the green shoots of recovery after a long, insufferable winter when all hope appears to have been lost. "It's so beautiful, Zack!" the woman cried out in a musical voice. "Better than I could have ever imagined. And to think you actually grew up here. I can't believe your father abandoned this place and let it descend into ruin. It's criminal to do a thing like that. He must have needed his head examining. What the hell was he thinking? I do love old houses, and this manor house is perfect in every sense of the word. I just love it, Zack. I love it." "Well, my father had his good reasons for abandoning the place, but it's a long story. But we're here now. How do you like your new home, Mrs. O'Rourke?"
"Ah, I just told you. I love it, Zack," cried the young woman. And Marcus watched Zack pick up the woman tenderly in his loving arms and open the polished black front door. He carried her over the threshold. The woman was giggling. She kept saying, "Put me down, Zack. I'm far too heavy. I'll break your back if you're not careful."
"Nonsense, sweetheart. You're as light as a feather. You barely weigh a thing," chuckled Zack O'Rourke. "Besides, what kind of a husband would I be if I didn't chivalrously carry my new wife over the threshold of her home?"
Marcus suddenly realized that the man he was seeing was Zack O'Rourke, and the woman he was with was his new wife. Zack O'Rourke had obviously devotedly fixed up Clayton Manor, with a team of renovators, builders, carpenters, cleaners, landscape gardeners and interior designers, for this new wife of his. He was probably not remotely concerned about threats from 20 years prior, when his own father had been told by a hairy man-like beast to stay the hell away from the property. But that had happened an awfully long time ago. Everything was different now, and even the atmosphere at the manor house spoke of brand new beginnings. As Marcus was soulfully reflecting over all of this, the young couple came boldly marching up towards him, with big smiles on their faces. They were a handsome couple that were very much in love, judging by the way they looked at each other so adoringly.
"It's very good to finally meet you, Mr. Devereux. As you can imagine, I am Zack O'Rourke, the owner of this house. It goes without saying I'm indebted to you for doing such a marvellous job in managing the estate and taking charge over everything so efficiently. You've done an exemplary job organising all the workmen that have come and gone over the months. You have overseen them all, and your work as groundsman here has been nothing short of flawlessly impeccable. As a consequence of all your gallant efforts, I have chosen to give you a substantial pay rise that is well deserved. Your work has been invaluable. It goes without saying I would like to continue using your services, and that I would like you to remain the groundsman for us here, as very shortly me and my wife will be moving into the manor to make it our new permanent home. Darling, I'd like to introduce you to our groundsman, Mr. Devereux."
"Delighted to meet you, Mr. Devereux. I look forward to working with you in the future. I'm so very passionate about roses and beautiful gardens. I want there to be plenty of rose gardens on this property, which I'm sure you will help me with."
"Most certainly, ma'am. I'm very fond of roses myself. I look forward to working with you."
"Well, I'm so pleased to hear that, Mr. Devereux, because, as I say, I'm going to put a lot of attention into those rose gardens. My husband tells me that you have been invaluable to this place, and that it was quite the mess when you first arrived here. I just want you to know, Mr. Devereux, I'm so grateful for your attention to detail, and that you put your heart and soul into making this place look so good. I can't tell you how grateful I am for that."
"It's a pleasure, ma'am. I must admit it was rather unkempt when I first came here," Marcus admitted, blushing with the compliment. "I busted my gut the first few weeks, bringing order to the place. But look at it now. The back-breaking work has paid off. The house has become a jewel. The grounds are beguiling."
Mrs. O'Rourke smiled warmly. "I know. The place is absolutely dreamy, more than I could have ever hoped for. I keep having to pinch myself all the time and to remind myself that, yes, Lydia, this place is your home." A few months went by until the O'Rourkes finally did move into Clayton Manor, and Lydia O'Rourke would often speak to Marcus about what she wanted done on the grounds, and Marcus helped her establish some stunning rose gardens on the property, as Lydia loved roses with a passion, and her husband created a rose that was named after his wife, called the Lydia O'Rourke Rose. Marcus returned home to Tennessee on several occasions with Tallister the cat to give his mother huge wads of cash, and his mother had been thrilled that Marcus had become so successful. "I told you, son, that going to New York would change your fortune," she said. But little did his mother know how much her son had actually endured and contended with, until he had pinched that pink stock card hanging on the post office notice board that had inadvertently changed his whole life in ways he never imagined possible. Marcus never lost sight of how lucky he had been, for the tide had now changed, and he was no longer living in a dingy apartment at St. James, where rats ran across his face while he slept. But he'd never let his mother be privy to the less glamorous aspects of his life when he'd first moved to New York. He didn't want his lovely mother knowing about the battle he had had to pay rent, the times that he'd gone to bed hungry, with his stomach growling so badly, because he couldn't afford to buy food. There were some secrets he would never share with his beloved mother, so he'd let her believe his trip to New York had all been plain sailing. Lydia O'Rourke had employed about 3 servant girls to work at Clayton Manor, to help her manage the property, along with a cook called Mrs. Bonchina. The couple had hosted some grand dinner parties there, so Clayton Manor had come back to life again. One day one of the servant girls, a young girl called Alexa, came rushing up to Marcus in a panic. She was wearing a white lacy apron over a black servant's dress, and her face was flushed bright pink. "I don't know what to do, Marcus," she cried. "I really don't." "What's wrong?" asked Marcus. "You look very white. Are you sure you're all right? Have you had a fright of some kind?" "Well, that's a good way to put it. I've had a fright, yes, and a nasty one at that. I was hanging the washing on the line, Marcus. I was sure something was watching me from the woods over there. I thought I was imagining it. But when I came back to retrieve the washing from the line, after I assumed it must be dry by then, all of Mrs. O'Rourke's washing was missing. Someone's stolen it. What am I going to do? Mrs. O'Rourke won't be best pleased to hear that her washing has done a walkabout. As far as I know, Zack O'Rourke's washing is all intact. I think there's someone out there in the wood grove, someone that's stolen her washing. I think we may have a trespasser on the property. What am I going to do, Marcus? How can I possibly tell Mrs. O'Rourke her washing has gone walkabout? She'll be very disquieted if I tell her this." "It's happening all over again," said Marcus. "History appears to be repeating itself at the manor." Alexis looked rather bewildered. "What's happening again? You're confusing me, Marcus. What do you mean?" "Well, it's a long story," said Marcus. "Never you mind. You come with me, Alexa. I'm sure we'll find the washing. I have an idea where we might find it." Alexis followed Marcus, and before long Marcus pointed to a trail of stones that led directly into the woods. "What are these?" asked Alexa. "What's going on here? What are these stones for? I feel as if I'm caught up in a treasure hunt of some kind." "Someone's teasing us," said Marcus. "They're playing a joke on us. My guess is these stones will lead to the washing you're looking for." Marcus and Alexa followed the stones, and then Alexa sighed with audible relief as she observed Mrs. O'Rourke's washing hanging over some branches. Luckily it wasn't damaged nor even dirty, which was a relief. So Alexa painstakingly gathered it together in a bundle, looking more than a little puzzled. That was when Marcus and Alexa both heard the chuckling. Someone was having a good laugh at their expense, and Marcus was pretty sure he knew who it was. It would seem the hairy man-like beast that had interacted with Philip O'Rourke all those years ago, telling him never to come back to the manor again, was up to his age-old tricks. Whoever he was, he clearly had a great sense of humour. Alexa turned around, and with an elbow on her hips, she looked extremely pissed off. She called out into the woods, "I don't know who you think you are, but I saw you watching me earlier when I was hanging out the washing for the O'Rourkes. You have no idea how awful it is to spy on someone. You think it's funny, do you, messing around with the likes of me and hanging my washing in the woods? This isn't a joke. It's not funny. Don't you dare do this again, or you'll have me to deal with." And with that she belligerently stormed out of the woodgrove with Marcus at her side, looking far from amused. By all accounts, after this bizarre, very puzzling incident, the washing belonging to Mrs. O'Rourke never ever went missing again. 2 years later, Marcus woke up in the groundsman's cottage and discovered Talissa was not sleeping on the bed with him. She dutifully slept on his bed every single night, following him around wherever he went. But Talissa was nowhere to be found, and Marcus grew unduly alarmed, for he hadn't seen Talissa in a couple of days, and this absurd behaviour, on his cat's part, was distinctly not like her. It was a beautiful spring day. The sky was a cup of blue, and the gardens at Clayton Manor had never been more beautiful.
Lydia O'Rourke, with secateurs in her hands, along with a big floppy navy blue straw hat on her head, was fastidiously cutting some roses to form a posy in her hands. It really looked beautiful. "Hello, Marcus," she said when she saw him. "Look at the roses I've gathered. Aren't they beautiful?" she said, thrusting the blooms into Marcus's face. "Don't they smell absolutely divine, Marcus?" "They smell wonderful, ma'am," Marcus agreed. "Are you all right, Marcus?" asked Lydia O'Rourke. "If you don't mind my saying, you look rather distracted. Is something worrying you? Everything is all right with your mother at home in Tennessee, is it? She hasn't taken ill, has she?" "No, it's not that," said Marcus, flushing awkwardly. "It's Talister. She's gone missing. I haven't seen her for a couple of days. You haven't by any chance seen her, have you? It's so unlike her to go missing like this." "Oh, you poor thing, Marcus," said Lydia. "That cat is a delight. But where has she got to? Can I help you look for her, perhaps? She must be somewhere around here. I've seen so many butterflies this morning. She could be on the chase. I've noticed how Talissa loves chasing butterflies." "No, it's kind of you to offer, ma'am, but I'll try and find her myself." "Marcus, don't you worry. I'm sure she's all right. I had a cat growing up, you know. Lovely thing she was. I called her Geraldine. God only knows why I used a name like that. Anyway, that cat went missing for 2 weeks. Never saw her for 2 weeks. It was a long time, you know." "2 weeks?" said Marcus, looking stunned. "You're kidding me." "No, I'm not," said Mrs. O'Rourke matter-of-factly. "Me and my family, well, we put up notices all over New York, you know. I pinned up notices on every tree I found, offering a sizable reward for our missing cat. My parents took me to one side and told me that it was unlikely that Geraldine would ever return home. I remember my father telling me distinctly that maybe she'd been run over by a passing car and was likely dead, lying in a gutter somewhere. My parents were not the kind of people that told you what you wanted to hear. They told you the grim truth, however bad it might be. So yes, I wept for many long days. My father came home one day with a cat to allay my grief, of course. So I called the new cat Gerald, as it was a boy. Lo and behold, 2 weeks later, Geraldine walks into the house without so much as a bye or leave. She was a little thinner, but no worse for wear, and was not remotely amused there was an interloper now in our home, bearing half her name. I was so thrilled to have her back, let me tell you. And that was when I learned that cats really do have 9 lives. Anyway, in the end, Geraldine and Gerald became inseparable. And they both lived long lives for cats, let me tell you." "So you think, ma'am, that I will find Talister?" asked Marcus hopefully. "But you do forget this is the countryside. It's a hell of a lot different to New York. Things can happen out here." "Well, I think Talister's a sensible cat, is she not, Marcus? I'm sure you will find her. Have you actually looked in the woods? She could be caught up in a tree, got herself stranded, perhaps. I remember in New York our neighbour, Mrs. Penbury, well, her cat got caught up in a high tree branch, was terribly afraid to come down. They had to call the fire brigade, you know. The cat was brought down by a fireman and was as right as rain." "Well, I hadn't thought of that," said Marcus. "Recently Talister's piled on a bit of weight. She was fat like that in New York, you know. But I noticed more recently she's picked up weight again. Perhaps she's not as agile as she used to be. Maybe she's stuck up a tree after all. I should go and investigate the wood grove." Marcus took Lydia O'Rourke's advice and ambled into the woods, calling out Talister's name. A dreadful fear gnawed at his gut, as he imagined that Talister may never come back home again. Marcus looked up every tree, craning his head up to examine the branches, and there was absolutely no sign of Talister to be seen. Where the hell had the cat got to? He called and called her name, and just when he was about to give up on finding her, a random stone was flung at him indiscriminately. He turned around to sharply find a big creature beckoning for him to follow him. The creature was over 10 foot tall, with bright, shiny, dark eyes that twinkled with humour. And on seeing the creature that Marcus soon realised was a Bigfoot, he was in no doubt this was the same creature that Philip O'Rourke had challenged over 20 years earlier. Marcus followed the creature, who was indicating for him to be quiet. And there under a bush next to an old oak tree was Talister, with over 8 kittens that she was now nursing. The hairy man smiled at Marcus, showing a set of pearly white teeth. He let out a chuckle and simply glided away, while Marcus went quickly back to the cottage to get a basket, so that all Talister's young could be brought back to the house. And all 8 kittens were soon adopted by the O'Rourke family, and lived on the mansion with Talister, and those were happy days indeed. So there you are. That's my story. Well, what can I say? That was an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.